This is a hey guys. This is a 2006 F150. Problem with this truck is that oil pressure gauge does not work. We're gonna start the truck, and the oil pressure gauge does not move. The truck runs okay, but we got no reading from our gauge here. Okay, so the way this works, the cluster sends a battery voltage to a oil pressure switch. The oil pressure switch is normally closed, normally open, but it's grounded through the block. And when the oil pressure reaches a normal engine oil pressure reaches normal pressure, the switch is going to close. It's going to provide the ground to that supply voltage. Is going to drop the voltage down to 0, and the cluster is going to read that as a normal pressure. So to diagnose this, we have to get down to pressure sensor, the pressure switch. I'm sorry, and this is the oil pan, front of the oil pan. This is the back of the oil pan. It's on the driver's side. It's right there. That's the location. Let's see if you can. So I got that pressure switch back probed with my T-pin, and I'm not sure if the camera I can't see anymore up close at all, but you guys can. I hope you guys can see this. I really can't. Okay, I think it's good. Okay, so that's the connector. That's the sensor is right there. So I got a T-pin this switch. So what we have to do now, we have to look at some voltage, and so the cluster supplies the voltage. So now I have just connected to my extension cord from my power probe. So I'm gonna go to my voltmeter, and I have a negative lead connected to a good ground. It's my negative lead. It's just connected to ground, and the positive lead now is connected to my pressure switch. Basically, that's my ground lead, and here's I connected my extension to my red lead on my voltmeter. So what we should see now is a voltage that's cluster sends to a pressure switch. Now, even though the truck is off, the key is out, the cluster is still alive, and I'm not sure for how long would send this voltage, but we still see the voltage there. So it's 11 volts. So now when we start the truck, if we have a good oil pressure, and if you have a good oil pressure switch, this voltage will drop down to 0, and the cluster is going to read that as a good pressure and should move our gauge. So let's start and see. We can see that our voltage went down to 0, but our gauge still not moving. So this is pretty much done. We have a problem with the cluster. Now we should probably check power and ground on the cluster, but I really don't think it's needed because all other gauges are working. I don't see any other issues with the cluster other than oil pressure gauge. But now we can see that our voltage is down at the 0, and at this point our gauge should move to normal operating range. So let's shut it off. We're going back to battery 11 volts, 11.5. Start again. So everything works fine. So unfortunately, this is not going to be a good news for owner. Seems like we're going to have it's a gauge inside a cluster that's not working. So so in this case, we have a cluster issue now. If you get you pin your back probe your switch, and you turn the key on, and you don't see any voltage voltage coming at the switch, then the next step would be to unplug the connector from the switch and see if the voltage comes back. If the voltage comes back, we're gonna have a short to ground on our switch. If we unplug the connector and we don't see any voltage, then it's possible that we have a short to ground or open in our signal wire. Now, theoretically, if we have anything that's shorted to ground, whether it is a switch or a signal wire, and if the cluster is working, that voltage is going to be dropped down to 0 right away, and the cluster is going to read it as a normal pressure, and the gauge should move anyway. So if in case of short, our gauge should work. Now, if we have an open, when we back probe the switch and we don't see any voltage at the switch, we unplug the connector, still no reading, then and our gauge doesn't move, we might have a open in a circuit. So, or a problem with the cluster as well at that point. So maybe the cluster does not provide a voltage to our switch. So those are, it's kind of pretty quick diagnostic. It's not much to it. So you can see we got the voltage there. So now other thing we can do, if you have a scan tool, we can do like with a snap-on. We can I already have a vehicle identified, and we can do a test. I'll turn the key on real quick. Oh, sorry, guys. And go to instrument cluster module. I put the key 20 in there. Codes, you can look for the codes. So if we memory codes, let's see if there's anything in it. No codes present. Now to this is a 15.2 software in this. I was going into a functional test, and I could not find a test for the gauge. So I got a whole bunch of stuff here to like let's see, ABS lamp. So let's do that real quick. You can see that ABS lights up, off, on. It's right there. Off, on. But I could not find a test for a gauge. And to do that, you got to go into a codes menu, and you go to key on, engine off, self-test, and press yes. And now you can see it's going to start moving the gauges. Let's see. There you go. So it moves the gauges now, but our oil pressure gauge still doesn't move. So let's do this one more time. Got no codes here. Do one more test. There you go. It cycles all of the gauges up and down, but our oil pressure gauge does not move. So that's pretty neat if you have a snap-on tool to do it. Also, I had tried this with an Autel, and I was really having a hard time because I could talk to a cluster. The Autel has a Maxides, I think I have, and it has the bidirectional controls for each gauge, but I think it's something messed up with the software. I couldn't do it. It would not respond to any of the commands through my scan tool. That's why I took the snap-on, and snap-on worked okay on this one. So you just never know with the scan tool. Sometimes they work, sometimes it doesn't. But that's it. I mean, guys, if you have a problem with the gauge, again, first check your voltage that's the first step. You got to do. And if you got a voltage, start the truck and see if the voltage dropped to 0. They'll tell you that you have a good switch, good battery, good signal wire. you know, good oil pressure, you know, and if you have a battery voltage, but when you start the truck, I forgot to mention that if you have voltage and you start the truck but voltage does not drop to 0, then you might have a faulty switch, or possibly you have a problem with the pressure, oil pressure. So so the switch will not close. So that's about it. I'm sorry, but this is going to be not a good news for the owner of this car, of this truck. Okay guys, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye. Okay guys, before I finish this video, I'm gonna add something on it, and this is gonna actually address our possible open in a signal wire. If you there's other things that can happen also, and I'm gonna demonstrate right now. When you start your truck, you know, on this one, of course, you know, my gauge doesn't work, but something else you might have also is a message for low oil pressure. Okay, right there. Now we have low oil pressure. So why do we have that right now? We didn't have that before. So what I did actually, I unplugged my connector from my oil pressure switch. Since I unplugged that, now we can see, you're going to see some glitches here, don't worry, but that's just my T-pin. So now we can see we have a high voltage here, 12.8 volts. So cluster is sending this voltage to be grounded by a pressure switch when the engine reaches a normal pressure, okay, oil pressure. Now if so we do know now that a high voltage means low pressure and a low voltage means normal pressure. So this is all just a T-pin. Okay, so now since I unplugged my connector, okay, and we're reading 12.8 volts, we do know now that we have a good signal wire, good supply to our pressure switch, and the only reason at this point that if we have a message for low oil pressure, the only reason this will happen is because that our oil pressure switch is faulty and it's not you know, closing when the oil reaches its normal pressure to provide a ground for this voltage to drop it down to 0, or we might have a real problem in the engine where we have a low pressure. Okay, so now other thing we can address here now, we can actually take a what I have here now. I have this little adapter. I wish I had a light here. There you go. I have this adapter here, okay, so I can actually, this is my again, the red lead is connected to my now to my connector, and the black lead is connected to ground, and I have a test light now. I have a test light, and I got this test light is connected to a good ground. So what I'm going to do now, and this is what you guys can do. So if you see now, you unplug your connector and you see the high voltage here, now you know that your cluster is not lying to you because it reads the high voltage. Then you can actually take the you can just take the test light and connect it to ground and touch this. This is just, sorry guys, just a second. It's not working for me now. Are you kidding me? Okay, so let's do this. So now I still have low oil pressure message there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to a back probe this wire. I'm going to drop this. You see this, I dropped it down to 0 and my message is gone. I got no more message for a low oil pressure. I'm going to start it up again. But again, my gauge doesn't work because of the cluster. But this might be another problem you might have, that constantly having a message for low oil pressure but your truck runs fine. So again, if you see the battery voltage at your connector, you have a problem with the pressure switch, or problem so now it's back to high volts again, or real issue with your pressure, oil pressure. Now, if we have a low oil pressure message on our cluster, okay, and we unplugged our connector from the pressure switch, and we take the reading, and we read 0 volts. Okay, the only possible option there is that it's going to be an open in your signal wire. Why? Because the cluster is reading high voltage and you're reading low voltage. So there's discrepancy, because cluster is reading a high volts, meaning a low oil pressure, but you're going to read a 0 at the at your connector. You have an open somewhere. That's it. There's no other reason why. And so this is what I want to clarify with you guys as well. You know, if you guys have this message as well, you know, that's how you're going to address that issue. And also, you know, if you have a problem with the gauge as well, and you know, your gauge doesn't move, and you unplug your connector, and you read a 0 volts at the connector, then you know, you might have a open on your signal wire. So so that's it. I think this is the now, you know, also other thing, you know, when you read 12 volts at your connector, okay, and you take your test light and you connect this to ground, okay, so you basically provide now a good functional switch. All right, so you're gonna provide a ground. We're gonna drop this down to 0 volts. Then at that point your gauge should move, okay. And if like for instance this would be a problem with a pressure switch or low oil pressure, but this way you can actually address your gauge as well to make sure your gauge is working. So you know, connect your test light, and the gauge should move when you provide a ground to your cluster. So low voltage to your cluster. So okay, guys, I hope this was not too confusing, but this is it. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time. Bye.